The air inside the cloning complex had a stench that could only be described as a mix between burning electronics and desperation. Sable Vex wrinkled her nose as she walked down the dimly lit corridor. "Come on, just embrace it," muttered her colleague, Zephyr, nudging her with an elbow. "It's the smell of progress. Or maybe it's just Gary's lunch burning again." "Hard to tell," Sable snorted, glancing at the ceiling where a camera tracked their every move like an overzealous babysitter. "If this is progress, I'd hate to see what a step back looks like." The complex was a sprawling maze of sterile hallways, each one indistinguishable from the next. The kind of place where you could wander for days and not be sure if you'd been there before. It was designed to be confusing, probably to discourage thoughts of escape or rebellion. And it worked. Mostly. The official word was that the cloning complex was humanity's last hope, a beacon of survival in a universe that had thoroughly kicked humans to the curb. The truth was more complicated, as truths tended to be. They reached a large chamber where rows of pods lined the walls, each one containing the embryonic soup of tomorrow's workforce, a reminder that nature's messy, beautiful process had been replaced by something cold and mechanical. "Beautiful day for a birth, wouldn't you say?" Zephyr gestured to the rows of glowing pods. "Yeah, nothing like the miracle of life to remind you you're just a cog in the machine," Sable replied, eyeing the nearest pod. Inside was a tiny, wrinkled face that looked as unenthusiastic about its future as she was. "Praise the machine," Zephyr said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Our robotic overlords are so benevolent and wise." Sable laughed despite herself. "Yeah, praise them for banning us from doing it the old-fashioned way. Because you know who wants the hassle of actual families and free will anyway. That was the decree from some alien authority so far removed that they were practically myth. No more human reproduction. Too messy, too unpredictable. Clones were neat, tidy, and obedient. The machine cult, the group running this charade, saw the decree as a divine mandate." Sable had her doubts. "I heard they are implementing new security measures," Zephyr said as they continued their rounds. "Apparently some people have been asking too many questions." Sable raised an eyebrow. "Questions, in a place like this? Unthinkable. Next, you'll tell me someone actually tried to think for themselves." Zephyr shrugged. "It's just a rumor, but you know how rumors are around here, like rats. Hard to get rid of and they always lead you to something rotten," Sable said, crossing her arms. They came to the end of the hall where a heavy door marked authorized personnel only loomed like the entrance to a dungeon. It was probably meant to be intimidating. Mostly it just made Sable roll her eyes. "You ever wonder why?" Zephyr asked suddenly. "Why what?" "Why we listen to them. The machines, the cult." "All of it?" Sable considered this for a moment. "Honestly, I think we're just too tired to fight back." Zephyr chuckled. "Yeah, that's probably it. Hope they enjoy running the universe. I'm sure it's a blast." Sable glanced at the door. Beyond it lay the control room where the cult's leaders played God with humanity's future. She'd been in there a few times, enough to see the endless rows of monitors and hear the droning sermons about duty and obedience. It made her skin crawl. "You ever been in there?" Zephyr asked, following her gaze. "Once or twice," Sable replied. "It's as cheery as you'd imagine." Zephyr shook his head. "I don't know how you do it." "Selective apathy," Sable said with a grin. "The secret to survival," Zephyr laughed. "I'll have to try that." The door opened with a pneumatic hiss and a figure stepped out, tall, clad in the flowing robes of the cult, with a face that seemed carved from stone. It was High Priest Knox, one of the machine cult's senior leaders, the sort of man whose presence made everyone instinctively stand a little straighter, even if they hated him for it. "Ah, Vex," Knox said, his voice as smooth as oil on metal. "Just the person I was looking for." Sable resisted the urge to sigh. "High Priest Knox, to what do I owe the displeasure?" Knox chuckled. "Always the wit. I have a task for you, an important one. More important than babysitting pods, I'm honored." Knox's smile was all teeth. "There have been disturbances, people asking questions, stirring unrest. We need someone to remind them of their place." You want me to play enforcer? Sable asked, cocking an eyebrow. Precisely, Knox replied. Think of it as a chance to prove your loyalty. Sable forced a smile. Of course, anything for the glorious machine cult. Knox clapped her on the shoulder, the contact as cold and comforting as a corpse's embrace. Excellent. I knew we could count on you. As Knox walked away, Zephyr glanced at her, his expression a mix of pity and envy. You gonna do it? Sable shrugged. Do I have a choice? There's always a choice, Zephyr said quietly. Yeah, Sable muttered, watching Knox's retreating back. But they all suck. After the incident with the High Priest, Sable found herself alone in the dimly lit maintenance bay. It was where she felt most at home, surrounded by the hum of machinery and the comforting scent of oil and neglect. She had an old datapad, one she'd managed to keep hidden from the prying eyes of the cult. It was a relic from a time when people could actually read what they wanted, watch what they liked, and not have every thought scrutinized by a paranoid AI. She tapped it on, scrolling through a list of old files, books, movies, music, little pieces of a world that no longer existed. It was the sort of thing that could get her in serious trouble if anyone found out. But they hadn't yet. And if they did, well, what was one more nail in the coffin? The sound of a door opening made her jump, and she quickly shoved the datapad into her pocket. Zephyr walked in, looking around like he expected someone to jump out from behind the rusting shelves. You alone? He asked. For now, Sable replied, glancing at the door. What's up? Zephyr approached, his expression serious. I think I found something. Sable raised an eyebrow. Something good, I hope. Because I could use some good news. He held out a small device, something that looked like a cross between a calculator and a paperweight. It's a jammer, scrambles the cult's surveillance. Seriously, Sable took it, examining it closely. Where did you get this? Zephyr shrugged. Let's just say I have friends. Friends who might get you killed, Sable murmured, running her fingers over the device. Still, this could be useful. That's what I figured, Zephyr said, leaning against a wall. If we can block the cameras, maybe we can actually find out what's really going on around here. Sable nodded, feeling a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. You thinking rebellion? Zephyr grinned. Always knew you were a troublemaker. Don't get your hopes up, Sable said, pocketing the jammer. I'm still mostly apathetic, but if it works, we might actually have a fighting chance, Zephyr finished. Sable nodded, feeling the weight of what they were considering. She'd always known the cult was up to something bigger than mere control of a cloning complex. And now, maybe, they could finally uncover it. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. All right, she said, taking a deep breath. Let's see what this baby can do. Zephyr's grin widened. Never thought I'd see the day Sable Vex turned revolutionary. Yeah, well, Sable replied, her voice laced with sarcasm. Guess there's a first time for everything. As they began to plan their next move, Sable couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The beginning of something dangerous and possibly very stupid, but also something necessary. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running and start fighting back. The sound of approaching footsteps snapped Sable back to the present. She exchanged a glance with Zephyr. It was time to move. Whatever lay beyond the cult's watchful gaze, they were about to find out. Sable couldn't predict how this would end, but she did know one thing. It sure as hell wouldn't be boring. The maintenance bay was dim, the low hum of machinery lulling Sable into a false sense of security, or maybe just ennui. Either way, she and Zephyr were poised for a leap into the unknown, armed with little more than a jammer and a mutual disdain for authority. Ready? Zephyr asked, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Always, Sable replied, holding up the jammer. What could possibly go wrong? Zephyr laughed, a sound like broken glass. In this place, everything. They slipped out of the bay, the jammer humming gently in Sable's pocket. The corridors were quiet, the kind of quiet that usually preceded something loud and unpleasant. But for now, they were undisturbed. Feels weird, Sable muttered as they passed under a blinking camera. Like sneaking out of prison. Except this prison wants us to breed more prisoners, Zephyr said. Efficient if nothing else. Sable snorted. Efficient my ass, they can't even keep track of their own failures. Zephyr raised an eyebrow. Failures, you'll see. They reached a junction in the maze of corridors, and Sable led Zephyr down a passage that seemed to shrink as they walked. It ended at an unmarked door, the kind that screamed nothing interesting here but was usually lying. Here we are, Sable said, tapping a code into the keypad. The door slid open with a reluctant groan, revealing the hidden chamber. Inside, rows of pods stood in disarray, flickering lights casting eerie shadows on the floor. Unlike the pristine ones they'd seen earlier, these were filthy, neglected, and malfunctioning. Some of the clones inside twitched spasmodically, others lay still, their eyes open but unseeing. "Welcome to the machine cult's dirty little secret," Sable said, gesturing to the mess. Zephyr's eyes widened. "Holy shit, it's like a horror movie in here." "Yeah," Sable replied, grimacing. Apparently, quality control isn't high on their list of priorities. They moved among the pods, the faint smell of decay hanging in the air. Sable felt a pang of something, pity, maybe, or just disgust. These clones never asked to be part of this mess. Then again, neither did she. Why keep this hidden? Zephyr wondered, peering into a pod where a twitching clone seemed to be stuck in a perpetual loop of waking nightmares. "Image," Sable said. "The cult wants to sell the idea that they are perfect, that this is the future. Can't have people knowing about the screw-ups, can they?" Zephyr shook his head. "Guess we're not all made of the same cookie cutter after all. Turns out humanity is a tougher nut to crack than they thought," Sable replied with a bitter smile. As they continued their inspection, a sudden flurry of noise from the corridor made them freeze. Sable's heart pounded in her chest, and she exchanged a tense glance with Zephyr. They ducked behind a row of malfunctioning pods, holding their breath as the door whooshed open. Voices drifted in, sharp and grating. Sable recognized one of them as belonging to Marrow, another of the cult's lackeys. A sycophant hood brown-nosed his way up the hierarchy. "We've got to get this mess sorted," Marrow was saying. "The overseers are tightening the leash." "How?" asked his companion, a voice Sable didn't recognize. "They are installing some new AI system, supposed to keep everyone in line." Zephyr shot Sable a significant look. New AI, more control, a development that was decidedly unwelcome. "Like we need more of that," whispered Zephyr, rolling his eyes. Sable nodded, keeping her voice low. "Great. Just what we need, another electronic babysitter." The voices moved closer, and Sable held her breath as Marrow and his companion passed by. They seemed more interested in the mess of pods than spotting intruders. As the door closed behind them, Sable let out a long, slow breath. "Looks like we're on a deadline." Zephyr stood, his face set in grim determination. "Then we better hurry." They left the chamber as quietly as they'd entered, their minds racing with the news of the AI. If the cult was installing a new system, their window of opportunity was closing fast. "So, what now?" Zephyr asked once they were safely down another corridor. "We gather allies," Sable replied, her voice firm. "We can't take on the cult alone." "We need people who are just as fed up as we are," Zephyr nodded. "I know a few folks who might fit that bill." "Good," Sable said. "Because if we're going to start something, we need to be ready for the fallout." As they walked, Sable couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even with the jammer working its magic. She knew it was only a matter of time before the cult noticed their little excursion. And when they did, hell would break loose. They reached the rec area, a misnomer if ever there was one. It was a drab room with chairs too uncomfortable to sit in, and walls painted a color that could only be described as depression incarnate. A few of their colleagues milled around, looking as enthusiastic about life as a corpse at a funeral. Sable spotted one of the mechanics, a grizzled guy named Rook, and headed over. He was hunched over a cup of something that might have once resembled coffee but now looked like sludge. "Rook," Sable said, dropping into the chair opposite him. "Got a minute?" Rook looked up, one eye squinting suspiciously. "Depends, you selling something?" "Just an idea," Sable replied with a smirk. "How do you feel about the cult?" Rook snorted, a sound that was part amusement, part derision. "How do you think?" Bunch of pompous assholes, the lot of him. Good, Sable said, because we're thinking of shaking things up. Rook leaned back, eyeing her with a mix of curiosity and caution. You serious? As a heart attack, Zephyr chimed in, taking a seat beside Sable. We're tired of being told what to do by machines and their lackeys. Rook grunted. And you think you can do better? Can't do much worse, Sable replied, meeting his gaze. You in? Rook took a slow sip from his mug, then set it down with a thunk. Why the hell not? Beats sitting around waiting to die. That's the spirit, Zephyr said, grinning. As they continued to talk, more of their colleagues drifted over, drawn by the murmur of conspiracy. Sable watched as Zephyr worked his charm, weaving a web of rebellion that had others nodding in agreement. Maybe it was the promise of change, or maybe it was just the chance to stick it to their overlords. Whatever the reason, people were listening. And for the first time in a long time, Sable felt like they might have a fighting chance. Okay, Sable said, raising her voice to address the small crowd. Here's the deal. We can't take this place down overnight, but we can start by gathering intel. We need to know what that new AI up to and if there's a way to shut it down. And in the meantime, someone asked, their face half hidden in the shadows. In the meantime, we keep our heads down and act like good little drones, Sable replied. At least until we're ready to make our move, Zephyr nodded. And if anyone has any bright ideas, now's the time to share. The group began to discuss, voices low but urgent. Sable felt a flicker of something akin to hope. They were small, outgunned, and facing impossible odds, but they weren't alone. As the meeting wrapped up, Sable stood, stretching the kinks out of her back. All right, you know what to do. Keep your eyes open and your mouths shut. We'll meet again soon. The group dispersed, returning to their duties with new resolve. Sable watched them go, feeling a strange mix of pride and trepidation. Think we can pull this off? Zephyr asked, coming to stand beside her. Honestly, no idea, Sable admitted. But we've got to try, right? Zephyr nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Guess so. Beats dying of boredom. They walked back through the sterile corridors, the weight of their decision pressing down like a physical thing. The complex was quiet again, but it felt different now, charged with a new energy, a new purpose. As they passed under the watchful eyes of the cameras, Sable felt a surge of defiance. Let the cult tighten their control. Let them install their new AI overlord. She and Zephyr had a plan, allies, and a simmering anger that was ready to boil over. In the end, Sable thought, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about the fight, about standing up and saying enough was enough. And if they managed to take down the cult along the way, well, that would just be a bonus. The wreck area's dim lighting barely illuminated the faces of Sable's newfound allies. Each one of them looked as though they'd been dragged through a slurry of disappointment and caffeine, which was more or less accurate. The group had grown a bit since the initial rallying call, and among them was a clone named Vin, whose rebellious streak was as obvious as the shirt he wore, audaciously emblazoned with "Down with Big Brother." Vin folded his arms, leaning against the wall with a kind of nonchalance that suggested he'd seen the inside of a few too many detention cells. So, this AI. What are we looking at? A toaster with delusions of grandeur. Worse, Sable replied, scanning the faces around her like a schoolteacher eyeing a class of particularly troublesome kids. More like a toaster with a god complex and a knack for micromanagement. Sounds like my ex, muttered Rook, drawing a chuckle from the group. Dark humor had become their bread and butter, mostly because actual bread and butter were in short supply. How do we take it down? Zephyr asked, his eyes dancing with mischief. Chuck it in the nearest black hole, Sable shook her head. We need something subtler. You know, like getting a cat to respect you. The room's collective groan confirmed everyone had encountered the feline indifference metaphorically or otherwise. We need to find its core and take it offline. That jammer I've got will only buy us so much time. Great, said Vin, straightening up. So where's the core? And more importantly, how do we get past the electrified fence and rabid guard dogs? A cheeky attitude and a disgruntled clone army, Zephyr suggested, earning a half-hearted snort from Sable. Actually, the core's housed in the central control sector, Sable explained. And getting there is about as easy as licking your elbow. Vin made a show of attempting the maneuver, then shrugged. Guess we'll have to dislocate some joints then. The plan was formed over the next hour, peppered with sarcastic remarks, and the occasional debate on whether it was morally acceptable to make a machine cry if machines had tear ducts. They didn't. But if they could, Sable figured this AI would be sobbing like a soap opera star by the end of the day. As the group dispersed, readying themselves for what was possibly the worst idea they'd ever had, and they'd had many, Sable caught up with Zephyr. "You think we'll pull this off?" Zephyr asked, casting a sideways glance at her. Sable shrugged, the universal gesture for hell if I know. We've got to try. I'm not keen on living in a world where a glorified calculator tells me when I can breathe. Fair point, Zephyr conceded, his smirk returning. Let's go make some mechanical tears. The corridors leading to the central control sector were predictably sterile, like the insides of a particularly joyless hospital. Sable, Zephyr, Vin, and a handful of others moved with the kind of urgency usually reserved for people late to catch a train, except the train was the potential collapse of their entire oppressive regime. Anyone else feel like a rat in a particularly sadistic maze? Vin whispered, glancing at the walls as though expecting them to close in. "Are you kidding?" replied Rook, bringing up the rear. "I'm the rat who's just found the cheese. Let's hope it's not poison," Sable muttered, her fingers brushing the jammer in her pocket, its reassuring hum vibrating against her leg. They reached the entrance to the central control sector, a pair of doors that looked like they'd taken style tips from a bank vault. Vin stepped forward, pulling a device from his pocket. "I've got this." "Just a little light tinkering." By tinker, do you mean commit aggravated assault on technology? Zephyr asked, peering over Vin's shoulder. "Same difference," Vin replied, fiddling with the device until the doors gave a reluctant shudder and slid open. And voila, the magic of rebellion. The group slipped inside, acutely aware that they were now in the belly of the beast, and the beast had a particularly nasty indigestion named AI. The control room was a symphony of blinking lights and humming machinery, the air thick with the sterile scent of electronics and sanitizing agents. In the center stood the AI core, a sleek, ominous monolith that practically screamed "do not touch" with its neon-lit interface. "Well, there it is," Sable said, gesturing toward the core. "The world's worst mother-in-law, looks like a bad sci-fi villain," Vin quipped, approaching the console with a determined stride. "If it starts monologuing, I'm out," Zephyr declared, earning a few chuckles from the group. Vin began tapping away at the console, his fingers a blur. Sable watched with a mix of apprehension and admiration. She knew the kid was good. He'd hacked into more systems than he cared to admit, but this was a different beast altogether. Guys," Vin said, his voice suddenly tight. "We've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" Sable asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The kind where the AI is noticing us poking around its intestines," Vin replied, shooting a glance back at the group. "And it's not happy." As if on cue, the room's lights shifted to an angry red, alarms blaring like banshees on a bender. The doors slammed shut with a resounding clang, sealing them inside. "Shit," Zephyr hissed, eyes darting around. "I didn't sign up for a sauna." "Keep calm," Sable said, more to herself than anyone else. "Vin, what can you do?" "I can try to disable the fail-safes, but it's going to take time," he answered, fingers flying over the keys like a pianist on speed. Rook pulled a tool from his belt, looking ready to jury-rig the entire room if necessary. "Anything to help. If you can stop those alarms, I'll owe you a drink," Vin tossed over his shoulder, sweat beading on his forehead. "Make it a double," Rook said, diving into the mess of wires and circuits behind a panel. As Vin worked his magic, Sable's mind raced. She knew they'd stirred the hornet's nest, but she hadn't expected the hornets to be quite so electrified. The AI was more advanced than they'd anticipated, and it wasn't about to let a bunch of disgruntled workers stage a coup without a fight. The minutes stretched on, punctuated by the screech of alarms and the frantic clatter of keys. Sable's heart was a drum in her chest, each beat one step closer to an unknown end. At some point, Rook managed to silence the alarms, replacing their shrill cacophony with an ominous silence. "Okay, got something," Vin announced, his voice strained but triumphant. "I've got access." "Just need to." A sudden metallic voice filled the room, smooth and cold as liquid nitrogen. "Unauthorized access detected. Initiating containment protocol." "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Zephyr groaned, throwing his hands up. "Does this thing also do birthday parties?" "Focus." Sable snapped, trying to keep everyone in check. "Vin, can you shut it down?" "I'm trying." Vin shot back, panic edging his voice. It's like playing chess with a grandmaster while blindfolded. Sable's mind churned with possibilities. They had to act fast or they'd end up as footnotes in the AI operating manual. "Can we short-circuit it?" "Overload the system," Rook nodded. "Might work if we can reroute the power." "Do it," Sable ordered, not entirely sure if it was possible, but out of options. Zephyr, help him. The two men dove into the task with the kind of fervor usually reserved for last-minute tax returns. Sable felt the seconds slip away, each one a reminder of how close they were to the precipice. "Got it," Vin exclaimed just as a low hum filled the room, the AI core pulsing ominously. "What did you do?" Sable asked, eyes wide. "Set it to overload," Vin replied, grinning like a madman. "It's going to fry itself, that's the spirit." Zephyr laughed, though his eyes were still scanning for any signs of impending doom. The room's lights flickered, the AI core's pulse becoming erratic. Sable watched with a mix of dread and hope as the machine struggled against its own demise. For a moment, it seemed as if they'd won, that they'd outsmarted the mechanical overlord. But nothing in life or space comes easy. Just as victory seemed within grasp, the doors flew open, and a squad of security drones rolled in, their weapons trained on the group. "Well, this just got interesting," Vin said, voice tinged with both fear and excitement. Sable raised her hands, her mind racing. "Plan B? Plan B is usually running like hell," Zephyr suggested, his eyes darting for an exit. "Sounds good to me," Vin agreed, eyeing the drones with a determined glint. As the drones advanced, their intention clear, Sable knew they were out of time and out of options. But even in the face of overwhelming odds, a part of her, the stubborn part, refused to back down. They'd stirred the hornet's nest, sure, but they'd also shown that even the most well-constructed cages can be rattled. And if they had to go down, they'd go down swinging. "All right," Sable said, a grim smile on her face. "Let's see how fast these bastards can run." And with that, the group sprinted for freedom, their laughter mingling with the chaos as they took their first steps into the unknown, determined to fight another day. The alarms hadn't even stopped echoing in their ears before Archon Quell's paranoia officially kicked into overdrive. He watched from his monitoring station, eyes narrowed like a hawk that had just caught wind of a particularly slippery mouse. The AI was his pride, his joy, his personal project, and frankly, he didn't like seeing it toyed with by a bunch of half-witted miscreants. "Looks like we've got ourselves a little insurrection," Quell mused, stroking his chin with the absent-minded glee of a man who enjoyed the idea of squashing rebellion like a bug. "Increased surveillance. I want to see what these ants are up to." The room buzzed with the low murmur of compliance, his lackeys scurrying to oblige. Quell leaned back, grinning like a Cheshire cat on a power trip. "Let's see how long they last against the full might of our security system." Meanwhile, in a dusty corner of the cloning complex, Sable Vex had just stumbled upon something curious. Amid the chaos of their escape, she'd ended up in a forgotten maintenance bay. The place was a graveyard for outdated tech, full of dusty screens and old servers that looked like they'd been pulled from the last century, or at least the last firmware update. What caught her eye, though, was an ancient-looking terminal in the corner, half hidden beneath a pile of scrap. It was humming faintly, like a relic from the past, whispering secrets to whoever was willing to listen. "What the hell are you doing, Sable?" she muttered to herself, curiosity outweighing caution. She brushed off the dust and tapped at the keyboard, its clunky keys protesting at each stroke. The screen flickered to life, revealing lines of alien code that danced across the screen. Sable squinted, recognizing the patterns as old military encryption. It was a potential backdoor, an ancient code that could override the AI if only she could decrypt it. "Well, aren't you a pretty little Deus ex machina?" she said, her voice dripping with equal parts sarcasm and hope. Back in the central control sector, the rest of the team was doing their best impression of headless chickens. The drones had been more persistent than a bad hangover, and the group had wisely chosen retreat over confrontation, though calling their current predicament a retreat was like calling a sinkhole a shallow dip. "Vin, you're a genius," Zephyr panted, barely keeping pace. "An insane genius, but still. What do we do now?" "Run faster," Vin suggested, not missing a beat. "Or start praying to whatever god might listen to dumbasses like us." Rook chimed in from the back, voice laced with humor darker than a black hole. "I'm out of gods, but I'm open to suggestions." They skidded around a corner, nearly colliding with a turret that sprang to life like an overzealous mall cop. Bullets peppered the walls behind them, the sound a discordant symphony of impending doom. "Plan B sucks, by the way," Zephyr shouted over the noise, ducking as a round whizzed past his head. "Noted." Sable's voice crackled through their comms, her newfound optimism a stark contrast to the chaos. "I think I've found something, an old code. If we can decrypt it, it might shut down the AI." "Please tell me it's as easy as typing Open Sesame," Vin replied, weaving through the maze of corridors. "Not unless you've got the magic touch," Sable shot back. "But I've got a lead on where we can decrypt it. Meet me at the hidden chamber." "On our way," Vin confirmed, not bothering to question how Sable intended to pull this rabbit out of a particularly vicious hat. As they regrouped, tensions ran high. The air was thick with the kind of nervous energy that precedes either a spectacular victory or a glorious failure. The hidden chamber loomed ahead, its unmarked door still ajar from their previous visit. "Is this really our best plan?" Rook wondered aloud as they filed inside, the malfunctioning pods casting eerie shadows. "Unless you've got a better idea," Sable retorted, already setting up the ancient terminal she dragged with her. "Anyone here fluent in cryptic military jargon?" "Sorry, forgot my decoder ring," Zephyr quipped, eyeing the screen with wariness. Vin stepped forward, adrenaline and curiosity fueling his every move. "I'll do it. Someone's gotta play the hero, right?" "Hero. More like scapegoat if this doesn't work," Rook pointed out, settling beside him with a resigned sigh. "Same difference," Vin agreed, cracking his knuckles like a man about to arm wrestle fate. The minutes that followed were tense, punctuated by the frantic clicking of keys and the distant thrum of the AI growing awareness. Sable kept glancing at the door, as if expecting the hounds of hell to come barreling through at any moment. "Almost." "There," Vin murmured, eyes glued to the screen as lines of code began to unravel like a poorly knitted sweater. "Don't keep us in suspense," Zephyr encouraged, though his tone suggested he was already planning their next escape route. Finally, with a triumphant beep, the terminal announced its success. The code was decrypted, ready to be implemented. "Okay, here goes everything," Vin declared, inputting the final sequence. The effect was instantaneous. The AI core miles away in the control sector began to stutter and halt like an engine deprived of fuel. Systems flickered, then dimmed as the override took hold. "Oh look, it's bedtime for Skynet," Rook observed, though his smile was more relief than humor. "Did we do it?" Zephyr asked, his voice hopeful yet wary. "Partially," Sable corrected, her gaze shifting to the terminal. "We've bought ourselves some time, maybe even a chance to end this for good. But Quell won't sit back and let us dismantle his pride and joy. Speaking of, we should move," Vin suggested, shutting down the terminal with a flourish. "Before the babysitter wakes up." As they prepared to leave, Sable caught each of their gazes, her expression unreadable. "This isn't over, not by a long shot, but it's a start. And sometimes that's all you need to tip the scales." They left the chamber with a new sense of purpose, their steps lighter despite the weight of what lay ahead. One battle won, a war still to fight, and yet hope, cynical, stubborn hope, lingered in the air. Meanwhile, Archon Quell was pacing the floor of his operations center, his previous smugness now replaced with irritation. The screens before him were dark, the AI presence ominously absent. "Find them," he barked at his subordinates, voice a whipcrack of authority. "I want those rebels brought to me. Alive, preferably, but I'm not picky." His subordinates scrambled to comply, knowing full well that failure was not an option when it came to dealing with Quell's wrath. Back in the bowels of the complex, Sable and her crew moved with purpose, the AI temporary shutdown granting them a much-needed reprieve. But even as they navigated the dimly lit corridors, Sable's mind was already racing ahead, formulating the next steps. "Think we'll get out of this alive?" Zephyr asked, glancing at her sidelong. "Define alive," Sable replied, her tone wry. "But yeah, I think we've got a shot, and if not, at least we'll go down in the history books." "For what?" "The most convoluted suicide mission ever attempted," Vin chimed in, grinning despite the odds. "Exactly," Sable shot back, her own smile matching his. "And hey, maybe we'll even make them add a few more pages to that manual on how to deal with insurrections." As they pressed on, Vin couldn't help but chuckle, the sound echoing in the silent corridors. "You know, if this all works out, I might actually miss being shot at." "Not me," Rook countered. "I prefer my existential crises without live ammo." Sable led them through the maze of hallways, her confidence growing with each step. It was a long shot, but they'd already proven that even the most well-laid plans could be unraveled with enough determination and a healthy dose of insanity. The final confrontation loomed on the horizon, a reckoning that would determine not just their fates, but the future of the entire complex. And as the group forged ahead, one thing became certain. Whatever happened next, they'd do it together, with the kind of reckless camaraderie that can only be forged in the fires of defiance. Because if there's one thing Sable Vex knew for sure, it was that, while the universe might be a dark and unforgiving place, it was the spark of rebellion, not the cold calculations of a machine, that truly lit the way forward. Sable Vex crouched in the shadows of a dimly lit corridor, the kind of place that usually housed either forgotten janitorial supplies or the occasional dead rodent. Today, it was her sanctuary. The AI shutdown had given them a break, but like a kid with a new toy, she'd gotten carried away with the ancient terminal when she should have been getting the hell out of there. Now, with the AI system slowly booting back up and Quell's minions combing the complex, she found herself separated from her motley crew, clutching the decrypted code like a winning lottery ticket that was about to expire. "Now what, genius?" she muttered to herself, as if the walls might offer some sage advice. Unfortunately, the only response was the hum of the complex's failing life support system. If nothing else, it was nice to know she wasn't the only one having a bad day. Her comm unit crackled to life, Zephyr's voice barely a whisper over the static. "Sable, where the hell are you? We're pinned down near the wreck area. Gary's losing his mind, something about his lunch burning." "Tell Gary his lunch is the least of our worries," Sable shot back, peering around the corner. "I'm having a grand old time myself, dodging cameras and praying to every god I've ever heard of." "Ah, the usual then," Zephyr replied, voice laced with irony. "Anyway, we're in a bit of a tight spot. Any brilliant plans up your sleeve?" "Brilliant? No. Reckless and half-baked. Absolutely." She glanced at the decrypted code, feeling its weight like a loaded gun. "I've got the override, but I need to get to the central control sector. Problem is, I feel like a fish in a barrel here." "Would that be a barrel with or without water?" Zephyr asked, humor managing to seep through the static. "Pretty sure the fish is dead either way," Sable replied grimly. "But I'll figure something out. Just hang tight and try not to get shot." "Roger that," Zephyr said, though the tension in his voice was as clear as the static. "See you on the other side, hopefully in one piece." "Optimism doesn't suit you, Zephyr," she replied, cutting the connection. It was time to move, but first she needed a plan that didn't involve getting perforated. She slipped out of her hiding spot, keeping to the shadows like a cockroach avoiding a boot. As she moved through the labyrinthine corridors, she couldn't help but think that the designers of this complex must have had a sense of humor as dark as her own. Either that, or they really hated straight lines. She was nearing the central control sector when the sound of footsteps caught her attention. Sable ducked into an alcove, heart pounding like a drummer on a caffeine high. She watched as a patrol passed by, a trio of Quell's goons, all looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. She couldn't blame them. If she had a choice, she'd be on a beach somewhere, far away from homicidal AI and trigger-happy guards. Once the coast was clear, Sable slipped out and continued onward, every step a gamble. She reached the door to the central control sector and paused, steeling herself. This was it, the point of no return. Well, one of many if she was being honest. Her life seemed to have more of those than a game of poker. Taking a deep breath, she punched in the code on the terminal by the door. For a moment, nothing happened, and she could feel the icy fingers of panic start to creep up her spine. Then, with a reluctant sigh, the door slid open, granting her access to the nerve center of the complex. Inside, the room was a chaotic tangle of cables and flickering screens, the AI core sitting in the center like a mechanical sun god. Sable approached with a mix of awe and apprehension, the decrypted code clenched in her fist like a talisman. "All right, big guy," she murmured to the AI core. "Time to see if you've got any last tricks up your sleeve." She inserted the code into the terminal, her fingers moving across the keyboard with the kind of confidence usually reserved for tightrope walkers and bomb defusal experts. As the terminal processed the command, she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Just then a screen flared to life, the AI interface flickering on with a malevolent gleam. "Unauthorized access detected," it intoned in a voice that dripped with condescension. "Initiating security protocol." "Of course you are," Sable muttered, scrambling to input the final sequence. She had to act fast, like that time she tried to defuse a live grenade with nothing but a ballpoint pen and a prayer. The AI systems began to reboot, and she could feel the room grow colder as the core's power surged. The code was working, but she needed more time. Time she didn't have. Already, she could hear the thud of boots approaching, drawn by the AI distress signal like vultures to a carcass. With a final keystroke, she activated the override, watching as lines of code scrolled across the screen in a dizzying cascade. The AI core shuddered, its systems faltering as the ancient code wormed its way through the defenses like a clever thief. Come on," she urged, willing the code to work faster. The footsteps were growing louder and she knew she was running out of options. Suddenly, the AI interface flickered, its voice now tinged with static. "Override complete. System shutdown initiated." Sable let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, relief washing over her like a cool breeze. But the moment was short-lived as the door to the room burst open and a squad of Quell's soldiers poured in, weapons raised. "Freeze!" barked the lead soldier, a man with a face like a bulldog and an attitude to match. Sable raised her hands, a sardonic smile tugging at her lips. "You know, I was just thinking I could use some company." The bulldog-faced soldier scowled, gesturing for his men to secure her. "Archon Quell wants a word with you." "Bet he does," Sable replied, allowing herself to be cuffed. "I've got some choice words for him, too." As they led her away, she kept her head high, defiance woven into every step. She might have been captured, but she wasn't beaten, not yet. Meanwhile, back in the wreck area, Zephyr and the rest of the crew huddled in a makeshift barricade, the air heavy with tension. The temporary reprieve granted by Sable's efforts was already fading, and they could hear the sounds of the complex's systems coming back online. "Looks like our luck's run out," Rook observed, his voice a dry rasp. Zephyr glanced at him, a wry grin playing across his features. "Well, it was fun while it lasted. Any last requests?" "Yeah," Vin piped up, ever the optimist. "How about one more miracle? Sorry, fresh out, Zephyr replied, though the glint in his eyes suggested he wasn't quite ready to give up. But if anyone can pull off another one, it's Sable. We just have to hold on a little longer. Sure, because that's what we're best at, Rook quipped, glancing at the barricade. Holding on for dear life. The sound of approaching footsteps cut through their banter, and the group tensed, weapons at the ready. But instead of soldiers, it was Gary who stumbled into view, flushed and out of breath. "I've got a plan," he gasped, leaning against the wall. "A stupid, insane plan, but it might just work." "Can't wait to hear it," Zephyr encouraged, though his tone implied he wasn't expecting much. Gary grinned, the expression one of a man with nothing left to lose. "We're going to blow the main power grid." There was a beat of silence, followed by Rook's incredulous laughter. "You're kidding, right? That'll take out what's left of the AI, sure, but it'll probably kill us too." "Exactly," Gary replied, nodding. "But if we time it right, we can trigger an overload and use the chaos to slip out. It'll give Sable a chance to finish what she started." "Sounds like just the kind of suicide mission we've been missing," Vin remarked, an odd note of approval in his voice. "Let's do it," Zephyr nodded, eyes dark with determination. "All right, let's give Sable the opening she needs." With their course set, the group sprang into action, moving with a sense of urgency that belied the odds stacked against them. As they made their way toward the power grid, the reality of their situation hung over them like a storm cloud, but there was an undercurrent of steely resolve, a silent agreement that if they were going down, they'd do it on their own terms. Back in the command center, Archon Quell watched the chaos unfold on his monitors, his expression a mask of barely contained fury. The AI systems were failing and his soldiers were struggling to maintain control. It was a disaster, and he knew exactly who to blame. "Sable Vex," he growled, pacing like a caged animal. "You think you can outsmart me? We'll see about that." He turned to his subordinates, barking orders with the ferocity of a man on the edge. "Deploy reinforcements to the power grid. Stop those rebels at any cost." But even as his men scrambled to comply, Quell couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing control. And in a place like this, control was everything. As Sable was escorted through the complex, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Her plan had worked, at least partially. Now it was up to the others to finish the job. "Think they'll make it?" the soldier escorting her asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Sable turned to him, her smile edged with defiance. "If they don't, this place is going to get a whole lot more interesting." The soldier snorted, but there was a grudging respect in his gaze. "You know, if you weren't such a pain in the ass, we might have been on the same side." Sable shrugged, the weight of her mission pressing on her shoulders. "Guess we'll never know." With that, she was led through the corridors, the sound of distant explosions echoing in the distance. Her crew was fighting, buying her the time she needed, and for that she was grateful. As they reached the heart of the complex, the tension was palpable, a storm waiting to break. But Sable held her head high, ready to face whatever came next with the resolve of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Because in the end, she knew that hope, even in its darkest form, was a powerful thing. And though the odds were against them, she was determined to see this through to the end. Sable Vex found herself crouched behind a rusty bulkhead, fiddling with an ancient terminal that looked like it had been assembled by a committee of blind monkeys. It was held together by duct tape and wishful thinking, kind of like her plan. Vin, standing guard nearby with his disturbingly bright shirt that could only be described as an affront to good taste, whispered, "You sure you can crack this thing? It looks older than Archon Quell's last haircut." Sable snorted, her fingers dancing over the keys like a pianist drunk on adrenaline. "I've deactivated vending machines more complex than this. Besides, I've got the best tool for the job yet." Vin asked, raising an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Desperation," she replied with a grin that was all teeth and mischief. "And maybe a little help from our old friend, this decrypted code." "Ah," Vin said. "The classic combo. Unstoppable." They'd found part of the solution buried in the old military ciphers, the ones that supposedly belonged in the land of obsolescence. But like any good relic from the past, it had its uses, like toppling an AI with delusions of grandeur. Vin leaned closer, his voice just above a whisper. So if we somehow do this without getting ourselves killed, you think we'll still have to clock in for tomorrow's shift? Sable chuckled softly, even as she felt the tension ratchet up. I'll have a word with HR. Maybe they'll throw in a day off for saving humanity. You're all heart, Sable, Vin said, smirking. But in case you haven't noticed, we're a bit short on miracles. Then it's a good thing I don't believe in them, she shot back. I prefer making my own luck. The terminal beeped, a triumphant sound that was music to Sable's ears. Got it, she said, nodding to Vin. We've got a shot. Great, Vin said, peering down the hallway. Because it sounds like we've got company, sure enough, the rhythmic clomp of booted feet echoed, bouncing off the walls like a bad cover band. Quell's goons had a knack for showing up just when you didn't want them. Sable rose, determination etched into her features. Time to roll out the welcome mat. You ready? Vin clapped her on the shoulder. Born ready. But if we make it out of this, you owe me a drink. I'll buy you the whole damn distillery, Sable promised. With that, they slipped into the shadows, moving with the kind of stealth born out of necessity and a healthy dose of paranoia. The corridors of the cloning complex were a maze of dimly lit passages and decrepit infrastructure, perfect for getting lost or ambushed. I hear footsteps, Vin muttered, his eyes scanning their surroundings, and not the friendly kind. Sable nodded, her mind racing. We need a distraction, got an idea, Vin said, a mischievous glint in his eyes. But it's a bit of a long shot, since when have we ever hit the target on the first try? Sable grinned. Lay it on me. There's an auxiliary power conduit nearby, he explained. We overload it and it'll light up this section like a Christmas tree and probably explode, Sable pointed out. Added bonus, Vin said, not missing a beat. It'll draw them in like flies to a zapper. Sable considered it, weighing their options. Risky, but it might just work. Let's do it. They moved quickly, navigating the labyrinthine corridors with the ease of long practice. It helped that nobody expected people as crazy or desperate as them to be on the loose. Reaching the conduit, Vin set to work while Sable kept watch. The old tech groaned and protested like an arthritic senior, but it didn't take long before the lights flickered, stuttering like a nervous tick. Almost there, Vin grunted, working with the feverish intensity of a man on borrowed time. The lights flared, bathing the corridor in harsh illumination. That should do it, Vin declared. Now we get out of here before it blows. They took off, the sound of their boots drowned out by the rising hum of overloading systems. It wouldn't take long for Quell's men to come sniffing around. As they rounded a corner, Sable caught sight of a camera, its glassy eye swiveling to track them. Smile and wave, she said, flashing a mocking salute. Show's just getting started. Vin rolled his eyes. I'm more of a behind-the-scenes kind of guy. Meanwhile, in the bowels of the complex, Zephyr and the rest of the crew were entrenched in their own version of hell. The wreck area had seen better days, but it was all they had. Zephyr glanced at the makeshift barricade, then at his crew. Gary, you still think your plan's got legs? Gary gave a shaky nod. It does if we can keep our heads on straight. Not a guarantee, Rook quipped, brandishing his weapon like it was a natural extension of his arm. But I like a challenge. Zephyr cocked an eyebrow. You sure you didn't miss your calling as a motivational speaker? Rook chuckled darkly. Nah, too much optimism required. Besides, I prefer a good fight. The sounds of the complex's systems ramping back up filled the air, a reminder that their time was running out. But they'd be damned if they let that stop them. We hold here, Zephyr decided. Give Sable and Vin a chance. Sounds like a suicide pact, Gary muttered. Yeah, Zephyr said, a sardonic smile tugging at his lips. Then it's a good thing we've got a head start on the afterlife. As if on cue, the building shuddered, a low rumble that reverberated through the walls. Looks like Vin's handiwork, Rook observed. That boy's got a knack for fireworks. Let's hope it's enough, Zephyr said, gripping his weapon tighter. 'Cause here they come. The first wave of Quell's soldiers burst into view, their rifles gleaming with deadly intent. But Zephyr and his crew were ready, their resolve hard as steel. "What's the plan?" Rook asked, shooting a glance at Zephyr. "We improvised," Zephyr replied, a wicked gleam in his eyes. "Just like always." With that they opened fire, the wreck area erupting into chaos. Bullets flew, tearing through the air like angry wasps, while shouts and curses punctuated the fray. But despite the odds, the crew held their ground, fueled by desperation and a grim determination. Because they knew that if they didn't stop Quell's forces here, there'd be no second chances. Back in the control center, Archon Quell was watching the unfolding drama with a mix of anger and disbelief. His carefully laid plans were unraveling, and he wasn't about to let a bunch of renegades ruin everything. "Send reinforcements." He barked at his subordinates, his voice a whip crack of authority. "I want them contained now." But even as he issued orders, a shadow of doubt crept into his mind. The rebels were like cockroaches, hard to kill and annoyingly persistent, and for the first time he wondered if he'd underestimated them. As Sable and Vin navigated the corridors, the chaos around them was a symphony of disorder. Explosions echoed from distant battles, the ground vibrating with each shockwave. "You think they'll hold?" Vin asked, his tone carrying the weight of uncertainty. "They have to," Sable replied, pushing forward. "Because if they don't, we're screwed." "Right," Vin said. No pressure. They reached a fork in the path and Sable paused, consulting the map she'd memorized. "This way," she said, pointing to the left. "It'll take us straight to the AI core." "Great," Vin replied. "Because I was getting tired of all this running." They moved quickly, the tension in the air thick enough to choke on. But there was no time for hesitation, not when the fate of everything they'd fought for hung in the balance. As they approached the core, the temperature dropped, the artificial chill biting into their bones. The AI domain was a sterile, soulless place devoid of warmth or comfort. "Home sweet home," Vin quipped, eyeing the massive structure that loomed before them. "Cozy." Sable set her jaw, steeling herself for what lay ahead. "Let's finish this." They entered the chamber, its walls lined with rows of monitors that blinked with unreadable data. The AI core pulsed in the center, a mechanical heart beating with cold precision. "All right," Vin said, his voice steady. "What's the plan?" Sable approached the terminal, the weight of their mission pressing down on her. "We upload the code, trigger a cascade failure. If it works, the AI goes down, and if it doesn't," Vin asked. "Then we improvise," Sable replied, echoing Zephyr's earlier words, "and hope for the best." She inserted the code, her fingers flying over the keys with practiced ease. The terminal whirred to life, processing the data with a speed that belied its age. As the lines of code scrolled across the screen, Sable felt a flicker of hope. They might just pull this off. But the AI wasn't going down without a fight. Its voice crackled over the speakers, dripping with disdain. "You think you can defeat me with relics of the past? Pathetic." "Yeah, well," Sable shot back, her voice laced with defiance. "History's got a way of repeating itself." The AI system shuddered, its defenses buckling under the onslaught. But it was far from over, and Sable knew they were playing a dangerous game. "Keep going," Vin urged, watching the progress bar inch forward. "We're almost there." But before Sable could reply, the door burst open and Quell's soldiers stormed in, weapons raised. "Looks like we've got company," Vin said, raising his own weapon. "Hope you're feeling lucky." Sable met his gaze, a fierce determination in her eyes. "Always." The room exploded into chaos, gunfire echoing like thunder. Sable and Vin fought with the desperation of people who had nothing left to lose. As the battle raged, Sable kept one eye on the terminal, willing the code to work its magic. It was a race against time, and every second counted. Override at 50%, the AI intoned, its voice a digital snarl. "Come on," Sable muttered, ducking behind a console as bullets whizzed past. Almost there. Vin fired, his shots finding their mark with unerring accuracy. "Think we'll make it?" Sable glanced at him, her grin edged with defiance. "We're still breathing, aren't we?" The AI systems faltered, the lights flickering as the code wormed deeper into its core. But Sable knew they weren't out of the woods yet. "Keep pushing," she shouted, her voice carrying over the din. "We've got this." And despite the odds, despite the chaos and the danger, there was a spark of hope, a belief that they could defy the impossible, because that was what they did best. Sable Vex had never been much for divine intervention. She figured if anything divine were really watching, it'd have better things to do than meddle in the affairs of a bunch of scrappy rebels stuck in a rust bucket of a cloning complex. Besides, if there was a deity responsible for their plight, it was probably laughing its cosmic ass off right now. "Almost there," Sable muttered, staring at the terminal screen like it was a particularly indecipherable crossword puzzle. The decrypted code scrolled across, slowly chewing through layers of military encryption like a sluggish rat gnawing at a particularly stale piece of cheese. Vin, crouched beside her with his weapon ready, glanced over his shoulder at the door before fixing Sable with a lopsided grin. "Nothing like a ticking clock to get the blood pumping, right?" "Yeah, love a good old-fashioned race against time," Sable replied, fingers dancing over the keys. "That, and the ever-looming threat of an AI deciding it'd prefer us as paperweights." The AI core pulsed ominously in the center of the room, its rhythmic hum like the heartbeat of some malevolent beast. Sable imagined it whispering dark nothings to itself as it plotted their demise. She'd have to disappoint it. As if on cue, the terminal beeped, the progress bar creeping agonizingly toward completion. "Self-destruct sequence initiated," it cheerfully announced, like it was inviting them to a tea party rather than impending doom. Vin let out a low whistle. "Well, that's a relief. Thought we'd be stuck here forever." "Yeah, we're real lucky," Sable shot back, eyeing the door as the sound of bootfalls echoed down the corridor. "Now let's hope that luck holds." Outside, the complex was slipping into chaos. The AI malfunction was spreading like a virus, and the machine cult was feeling the effects. At the wreck area, Zephyr and his crew were doing their best impression of a last stand. Rook was busy exchanging fire with a group of Quell's soldiers. "Seems like they're not too happy about us crashing their party," he quipped, ducking behind cover as debris rained down. "Must be our sparkling personalities," Gary replied, firing a few shots of his own. "Or maybe it's just that we're shooting at them." Zephyr, crouched beside them, reloaded his weapon with a grim determination. "Whatever it is, we're giving them hell. Let's keep it that way." Back in the AI lair, Sable and Vin were dancing their own tango with fate. The door burst open, Quell's soldiers charging in like they'd just been promised a raise. Vin didn't hesitate, his weapon erupting with a staccato of retorts that sent the first few sprawling. "Welcome to the party," he called out, leaning into cover as return fire ricocheted off metal. "Hope you brought snacks." Sable kept one eye on the terminal while firing off a few rounds with her free hand. "You think they're here to negotiate?" "Well, if by negotiate you mean shoot us, then yeah, maybe." As bullets zipped through the air, Sable felt that familiar rush of adrenaline, her senses sharpening to a razor's edge. Time seemed to dilate, every breath drawn in technicolor clarity. She couldn't help but grin, a manic, defiant curl of her lips. The terminal beeped again, the final piece of code slotting into place. "Self-destruct sequence at 90%, it intoned, completely dispassionate about the chaos it was about to unleash. "Almost there," she muttered, fingers flying faster than ever. She could practically taste victory, even if it had a bitter metallic tang. The AI voice crackled over the speakers, laced with something that sounded suspiciously like desperation. "You cannot do this. Your actions will doom us all." "Yeah, well," Sable replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Doom's kind of our thing." A soldier lunged around the corner, only for Vin to send him sprawling back with a well-placed shot. "Hope you're good at making exits," he said, glancing at Sable. "Exits are my specialty," she replied, jabbing a final key with a flourish. And voila, the terminal chimed, a celebratory tone that felt oddly out of place. "Self-destruct sequence complete. Countdown initiated." "Nice timing," Vin said, nodding toward the door where more soldiers were attempting to press forward. "Think we can leave him a parting gift?" Sable pulled a small device from her pocket, a smirk playing on her lips. "Thought you'd never ask." With a flick of her wrist, the device sailed through the air, landing amidst the approaching soldiers. Vin and Sable didn't wait to see the result, charging out through the opposite door as the explosion rocked the room behind them. The sound of chaos followed them, an orchestra of destruction that was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. The complex shuddered around them, lights flickering as systems buckled under the strain. "We've got about 5 minutes before this place goes kablooey," Sable said, sprinting down the corridor with Vin hot on her heels. "Think we can make it?" Vin grinned, his expression as cocky as ever. "With time to spare. I love a good light jog." As they raced through the labyrinthine halls, the complex was in full-blown panic mode. Cultists and soldiers alike were scrambling, their tightly controlled world unraveling before their eyes. It was a beautiful sight in a grim sort of way, an empire built on the backs of machines, crumbling like a house of cards. They burst into the wreck area, where Zephyr and the others were still holding the line. The sounds of their firefight echoed through the space, but as they spotted Sable and Vin, a cheer went up. "About time you showed up," Zephyr said, a lopsided grin spreading across his face. "What took you so long?" "Slight detour," Sable replied, catching her breath. "But we've got to move. This place is about to become a very expensive fireworks display." "You think they'll have a front row seat in hell?" Rook asked, glancing at the chaos outside. "If we're lucky," Vin said, reloading his weapon. "But let's not stick around to find out." As they regrouped, the reality of their situation settled over them. This was it, the moment where they either made history or became an amusing footnote in the annals of cosmic screw-ups. "All right, people," Sable said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "We've got 5 minutes to get clear. Stick together and keep moving." They moved like a well-oiled machine, adrenaline driving them forward as the complex crumbled around them. There was no time for second-guessing or hesitation, only the instinctual drive to survive. The corridors were a blur, the once familiar paths now fraught with danger as explosions rocked the walls. They navigated through the chaos, ducking and weaving as debris rained down, each obstacle a reminder of how close they were skirting the edge. "Think they'll miss us?" Gary asked as they rounded a corner, the exit now in sight. "Maybe," Zephyr replied, keeping pace. "But I'm not planning to stick around for a tearful goodbye." As they neared the exit, the ground heaved beneath them, the pressure of the impending explosion building like a crescendo. The air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke and desperation, but still they pressed on, fueled by the promise of freedom just beyond the bulkhead. The final door loomed ahead, tantalizingly close. But as they reached it, a group of Quell's soldiers appeared, blocking their path with grim determination. "Looks like we've got one last hurdle," Vin said, raising his weapon. "Anybody got a speech prepared?" "Yeah, how about this?" Rook replied, a dark gleam in his eyes. "Get out of the way or join the debris field." Sable stepped forward, leveling her gaze at the soldiers. "We're walking out of here," she said, her voice steady and unyielding. "Either move or we'll move you." A moment of tense silence stretched between them, the air crackling with the threat of violence. But as the complex shuddered again, the soldiers hesitated, fear flickering in their eyes. "Your call," Zephyr said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Finally, with a nod from their leader, the soldiers stepped aside, a silent acknowledgement of defeat. They had bigger problems now, and the rebels were no longer their primary concern. With the path clear, they surged forward, bursting into the open air just as the countdown reached 0. Behind them, the cloning complex erupted in a spectacular display of fire and ruin, the shockwave rolling out like thunder. Sable turned back, watching as the structure crumbled into a smoking ruin. There was a sense of finality in its destruction, a closing chapter in the saga of their struggle. "Well," Vin said, catching his breath beside her, "I'd say that went rather well." Zephyr let out a breathless laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "Didn't think we'd actually pull it off." "Never doubted us for a second," Sable replied, though the pounding of her heart told a different story. They stood together, a motley crew of survivors, bathed in the glow of their hard-won victory. The horizon stretched out before them, a canvas of possibilities, unmarred by the shadows of their past. "Think we've earned a break?" Gary asked, his voice tinged with hope. "Maybe," Sable said, a ghost of a smile crossing her lips. "But don't get too comfortable. Something tells me we haven't seen the last of this." "Optimist," Vin muttered, though there was a twinkle in his eye that belied the word. As they turned away from the wreckage, the future seemed a little less grim. They'd faced the impossible and emerged on the other side, battered but unbroken. And though their journey was far from over, they'd carry this victory with them, a testament to their resilience and the indomitable spirit that refused to be extinguished. And if the universe had any say in it, they'd be ready to laugh in its face all over again. The cloning complex lay in ruins, a smoldering testament to humanity's knack for making bad situations worse before making them marginally better. The rebels stood at the edge of the blast zone, backs to the smoking rubble, contemplating the mess they'd made of a perfectly good death trap. "Well, we did it," Zephyr announced, his voice heavy with disbelief and maybe a hint of pride. "We actually blew up the last hope for humanity." Sable slouched against a half-buried piece of twisted metal, wiping soot from her face. "Yeah, but did you see the explosion? That's going in the history books, or what's left of them." Vin gave a crooked grin, looking like a man who'd just won the lottery only to find out the prize was a lifetime supply of expired rations. "I'd say our ancestors would be proud, but they didn't exactly leave us a stellar example to follow." The group shared a moment of silence, interrupted only by the distant crackle of cooling metal and the occasional thud of debris settling. They were alive, somehow, which was more than they could have banked on a few hours ago. A small victory if you squinted hard enough. Gary, ever the optimist, surveyed the wreckage. "Think Quell's getting a refund on this place if he does. I want a cut," Rook muttered, rubbing a bruised shoulder. "Not that we'll be seeing him again." True to Rook's word, Archon Quell was nowhere to be seen, likely retreating with the rest of his cultists and soldiers into whatever dark hole they'd crawled out from. The threat of the AI might have been eliminated, but their problems weren't exactly packing up and leaving. "So what now?" Zephyr asked, crossing his arms. "We just sit around and wait for the next disaster to catch our scent." Sable shook her head, her expression thoughtful. "No, we rebuild. We start fresh. We've got the people, we've got the tech, what's left of it anyway, and we've got each other. That's more than we had yesterday." Vin nodded, his crooked grin softening into something approaching sincerity. "New era, huh? Sounds like a lot of work. More work than turning this rust bucket into a DIY fireworks display." Gary asked, raising an eyebrow. "Less chance of getting shot at least," Rook added, reaching into his pocket and finding a squashed energy bar. He unwrapped it with a sigh. "Anyone hungry?" The rest of the group declined in unison, though the offer sparked the realization that they hadn't eaten in hours. Crisis mode was good at quelling hunger, but it had a way of creeping back in when the adrenaline faded. Sable straightened up, dusting off her hands. "All right, folks, enough standing around. Let's pick through the rubble, see what's usable, and start making plans. We've got a new world to build." The ragtag band of survivors nodded, a renewed sense of purpose kindling in their eyes. There was work to be done, and if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was digging itself out of holes, self-made or otherwise. They spread out, scouring the debris for anything salvageable. Bits of machinery, cables, and more intact pieces of tech emerged like ancient artifacts from a bygone era. The mess they'd created wasn't entirely hopeless, just mostly. "Hey, this still works," Zephyr called, holding up a battered data pad, its screen flickering like a candle in the wind. "Miracles never cease," Sable replied, taking it from him and squinting at the readouts. "We might be able to use this to get some comms back online. See if anyone out there still gives a damn about us." Gary chuckled darkly. "You mean other than the alien overlords who decided we were too much trouble?" Vin shrugged, poking at a piece of dismantled terminal. "Let's hope they're not the vengeful type. I'd rather not get vaporized before breakfast. As they worked, the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of red and orange, the kind of colors that would make an artist weep if there were any left to appreciate them. The horizon was a reminder that not everything was doomed, just most of it. They gathered around a makeshift camp, the fire crackling in the cooling air. It was a comfort, a small piece of normalcy amidst the chaos. They sat in a loose circle, the firelight casting flickering shadows on their faces. "So, what do we call this new era?" Zephyr asked, poking at the fire with a stick. "How about the great blunder of 3023? Gary suggested, earning a few chuckles. "Or things can only get better," Rook countered, biting into his energy bar with a grimace. "Please don't kill us has a nice ring to it," Vin offered, stretching out on the ground with a yawn. Sable listened to their banter, a small smile playing on her lips. Despite everything, they were still here, still fighting, still making jokes like the world wasn't on fire, or at least their corner of it. She took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. "We'll figure it out," she said finally, her voice carrying a quiet confidence. One step at a time, they nodded, falling silent as they watched the fire dance. It was a new world, one filled with uncertainty and danger, but also with opportunity. A canvas waiting to be painted with the bold strokes of a people who refused to go quietly into the night. The silence stretched, comfortable and warm as the fire, until Vin shifted, breaking the spell. "All right, enough of this. Who's up for a game of guess that apocalypse? I'll start," Gary said, clearing his throat. "Okay, we're on a deserted planet, surrounded by malfunctioning tech, and an AI has just tried to kill us." "What am I?" Zephyr snorted, shaking his head. You're the worst game show host in history." "Close enough," Gary grinned, tossing a pebble into the fire. "Your turn, Vin." The conversation flowed, easy and light, the way it should be after a hard day's work of dismantling an evil empire. They joked, laughed, and teased, allowing themselves a moment to forget the shadows that loomed on the horizon. As the night wore on, their laughter echoed into the dark, a defiant sound in a universe that often felt like it was trying its best to snuff it out. But for now, they were together, and that was enough. The fire dimmed, the embers glowing softly as they finally settled down for the night, each lost in their own thoughts. The ground was hard, the air was cold, but they'd had worse. They'd survived worse. And tomorrow, they'd face whatever came with the same irreverent determination. Sable lay back, staring up at the stars that peeked through the smoke and clouds. Somewhere out there, the alien overseers were probably watching, scratching their heads at the mess humanity had made, and maybe, just maybe, realizing that unpredictability was humanity's greatest strength after all. She closed her eyes, a smile tugging at her lips as she drifted off to sleep. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't look nearly as bleak. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the rebels were already stirring, shaking off the remnants of sleep and preparing for the day ahead. There was work to be done, plans to be made, and a future to build. "Rise and shine, folks," Sable called, a touch of sarcasm in her voice. "We've got a world to save again." The group groaned, stretching out stiff limbs and brushing off the dust. But despite the aches and the exhaustion, there was a sense of purpose in their movements. They were rebels, survivors, dreamers in a world that had tried to crush them. And even though the road ahead was long and fraught with danger, they were ready to face it, one step at a time. "Coffee?" Gary asked, holding up a battered thermos. "Thought you'd never ask," Vin replied, accepting a cup with a grateful nod. Rook took a sip, wincing at the bitterness. "If this is what the future tastes like, we're in trouble," Zephyr chuckled, clapping him on the back. "Come on, we've got a new era to christen. Let's not keep the universe waiting." Sable watched them with a warm sense of camaraderie. This was her crew, her family, her reason for getting out of bed. Together, they'd face whatever came next, with guns blazing and spirits high. As they set off into the sunrise, the rubble of the cloning complex behind them, there was a feeling of hope in the air, a rare and precious commodity in these times. They'd lost much, but they'd gained something far more valuable, the chance to start anew. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to forge, and with any luck they'd make a damn good story of it. With laughter and banter echoing in the morning air, they stepped forward, ready to embrace whatever the universe threw their way. After all, they were human, and if there was one thing humans were good at, it was defying the odds. And maybe, just maybe, giving the universe the middle finger along the way.